Hey everyone. So you're staring down your opponent, grimacing, making him feel like back on his heels, like he's going to give in and tell you what you need to know. Well, you're using intimidation in Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds, one of the best games today. Hey everyone, it's Carl with Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. Would love your support. Would love your likes, subscribes. Definitely subscribe. So I'm trying to get to a milestone of subscriptions so I can do another celebration live stream. So that would be awesome to get some subscriptions. And of course, support's always great. That gives us a chance to buy more Savage World stuff from PEG or from independent developers and be able to talk about them and read them and understand them and, bring that to the table. So anyway, what am I talking about today? So I want to talk about intimidation, the skill in Savage Worlds. It's kind of cool. It's got a couple of uses. It's a little bit unique in some of the skill set. So let's talk about it. So what is intimidation? Intimidation, as per the book, is the art of frightening an opponent so that he backs down, reveals information, or flees. It's used for three things in Savage Worlds. First is kind of a out of combat standard trait roll where perhaps you're trying to intimidate a guard at the gate to have him let you in. Maybe you're intimidating a street robber or thief to try to find out where the Thieves Guild is, whatever. But it's just a straight trait roll in that situation. Still opposed, because it's still an opposed roll. So intimidation, in most of its cases, is going to be an opposed roll. So it's imposed, but it's just a basic trait roll. The second one is in combat. It's used very, very effectively for tests. And as we know in tests in combat, that allows you to kind of distract, make your opponent vulnerable, with the right raise and that sort of thing, make them shaken. So in other words, get your opponent in a state where they're more likely to be damaged or they're less likely to damage others, gives the other party members a chance to do their thing with a bonus or the opponent with a penalty. So tests are really awesome things. And you can use intimidation to perform tests. It's very powerful in combat. One of the things intimidation is tied to, or I should say intimidation is tied to spirit. So you may ask yourself, well, I can already do tests in combat. Maybe I'm a combat person, so I can do a test using my melee weapon or something along those lines to have this general same effect. Absolutely, you can. But now remember that test for things like fighting are going to go against agility, which a lot of people may have bumped up their agility, especially if they're kind of a fighter type person. Intimidation goes against spirit. And so that is a little cooler in the sense that maybe spirit's not bumped up as high. There's another skill called taunt that goes against smarts, which may be even better for dumb opponents that you're running into. But we're not talking about taunt. We're talking about intimidation. So the third thing it's used for is networking. So networking is the subsystem in Savage Worlds where you can go gather information. It's abstracted out. You don't have to go through the motions of talking to the vendor or talking to the person in the street unless that's important to the narrative. But for networking, you simply define what you're trying to do, how you're doing it, and then one die roll either get you the information, get you problems, get you complications, what have you. And so networking for intimidation. So you can do networking with persuasion, which is in the nice way. Intimidation is the negative way. So intimidation can be used to gather information, call in favors, or make demands, but it's less savory. Each attempt to work the streets takes several hours of threats and general unpleasantness, rousting the local populace for whatever the hero needs. So now, what's cool is this is a trait roll, so you're not going opposed roll with anyone in particular. So if they get success, they get what they want. They may, though the folks that they interacted with abstractly may want some payback later. They may come back, this being a brute may come back to haunt them. You don't know. If they fail, they don't get anything interesting. There's no information to be gained. It was all a waste of time. And if they have a critical failure, they get bumps and bruises. So maybe they got in a fight and they never got the information they needed. You can improve your odds by doing what they call busting heads, which you get a +2 on that roll, but it basically alienates your contacts. You just were a little too tough. A simple failure in this case means you get bumps and bruises. So that's something that you have to deal with. And a critical failure has more serious consequences. So in that case, I'd probably, as a game master, now somebody's out to get you. Now somebody wants some payback, what have you. Maybe not enough to create a new hindrance, an enemy hindrance, but people want payback for you just being a general jerk or whatever, or that sort of thing. So I talk about intimidation in the sense of somebody who wants to be an intimidation type character. And I think, like I said, that is a great, obviously you could be that could be your focus, but I think intimidation is a great secondary kind of set of skills for somebody who's got another specialty, because intimidation goes against spirit. And so that's another area that you're going against, another attribute that's could be lower than something like an agility or something like that. So what is the negative things that you could do as far as intimidation? So if you're going to be super non-intimidator, you want to never really do that. You're meek, you're mild, whatever. There's actually there's actually three hindrances related to it. First is mild-mannered, which is a minor one. Has a hard time looking threatening or being threatening, and so they get a -2 under intimidation rolls. Second one is timid, which is a major, and that's same thing. You subtract 2 from your fear checks when resisting intimidation. So that one now is in the fear sense, and so fear can be pretty deadly if you get penalties to it. Because remember, you can have a heart attack with fear. And then the last one is tongue-tied, which is another major one. Has a hard time talking, flubs lines, gabs too much, whatever, and you get a -1 penalty to intimidation and performance and persuasion and taunt rolls that involve speech. Now, what's interesting is it kind of alludes to it in the main book, but it's really kind of spelled out very specifically in the Savage Pathfinder, that in the language section, that if you need to be able to speak the language of, or be able to get your point across to the person that you're interacting with in order to really intimidate them. If you're doing a verbal intimidation, obviously, if you're holding them by the collars and holding up against the wall, they may get the point for sure. So, but Savage Pathfinder really spells that out. It's not as spelled out in the core book. All right, so let's talk about how you become better at intimidation. Obviously, you can pay for more skill points, but there's some edges that come into play for your menacing and intimidating character. First is menacing. And that one's a novice, so you can have it right away, but it requires bloodthirsty, mean, ruthless, or ugly as far as your hindrances go. And this says, being brutish, a lout isn't always a drawback. Menacing allows the character to put their bad looks or worse attitude to good use. The goon gets +2 to their intimidation roll, so they get a +2. So that's a pretty cool, easy to get early on. It's a novice edge. So if you really want to do intimidation, and that's a very specialty of yours, you can get this edge very early on, and a +2 is very valuable. We know that is a big deal when it comes to Savage Worlds and trying to. Now remember, these are opposed rolls generally for intimidation, so that +2 really helps when you're going against somebody and you need to maximize your roll. Rabble Rouser is the second one. This is now dealing with a group of people. So as a limited action, they can take, with this edge, they can do a social test with intimidation or taunt against all enemies in a medium blast template. The targets must be able to see the hero clearly. Each defender resists and is affected by the test separately. But now you're doing intimidation in a medium test or medium template. So that's a huge advantage for an area effect, testing environment. So in combat, you can test a group of people, which is totally cool, can really put them on their heels, give your party a huge advantage over a group of individuals, especially if you're going against a bunch of mooks. Make it so that they have a harder time getting to you and you can just mop them up. That's really cool. And then the last one I want to mention is not really an intimidation. Well, actually, there's two more, but the one I'll mention next is not actually intimidation, you being an intimidator, but retort is also related to intimidation. So if a character with retort gets a raise when resisting intimidation or a taunt test, the foe is distracted. So this is it's probably not my favorite edge in this regard, but remember, if you're being intimidated, it's going against your spirit, which you probably have a high spirit if you're spending points on intimidation and you don't want to spend the 2 points every time you're trying to raise the skill. You want to be able to raise it high. So that's kind of cool. And then the last one, I promise this one now, is Streetwise. And Streetwise allows the character to add +2 to intimidation or persuasion rolls made to network. And I talked about networking. I talked about how you can do the heavy-handed intimidation-based one. Well, now you can get a +2 related to using that intimidation because of Streetwise. It also gives you a +2 to common knowledge pertaining to the types of disreputable activities listed above. And it talks about, where to get illegal weapons, who's the boss, who's hiring muscles, stuff like that, shady stuff. But +2, again, on intimidation, very valuable. So Streetwise is for that networking. Menacing is for menacing, and rabble rouser are more for the testing side of it. It's cool. All right. So another item just to kind of mention in passing is in Savage Pathfinder, the barbarian class has an edge called Intimidating Glare. And what this one says is when the barbarian's action card is Jack or higher, she may make an intimidation roll as a limited free action. So it's a free action. They ignore the usual advice on repetition. So remember, in the tests, the more you use the same skill over and over again, the less effective it's going to be. They may issue threats, insults, but terrible glare is often enough to send shivers down the foe's spine. And so that's a free intimidation roll. So if your intimidation's great and you're a barbarian, that's like a whole nother action that you get to take. And then if you're a arcane background person, you can also take advantage of a power called empathy. And on a successful arcane skill versus spirit roll, gives the caster insight into the target's basic emotion and gives them a +1 bonus or +2 of the raise to all intimidation, persuasion, performance, or taunt rolls. So that can be super useful too if you've got an arcane background. Now the issue, of course, is it says arcane skill versus spirit roll. So they still an opposed roll. It's not automatic like some powers are, but you're using your arcane skill. And so as an arcane background person, you probably have a very high arcane skill. And so intimidation is going to be a lot easier for you. And now this is a novice power, only cost a point, so could be super useful. I don't know if I would spend early power slots. You only get so many powers as a novice. I don't know if I'd spend that on it, but it's certainly a certain build type of character that you're trying to do, or kind of making them have a certain flair or whatever. It's definitely a power that is useful. It does have the additional recipients modifier, so you can affect more than one target. So now your arcane background can be, you can take advantage of that, and now you have that kind of rabble rouser thing for a group of individuals that you can then take advantage of. And it'll last 5 rounds. So very powerful, very useful. So that is kind of intimidation in a nutshell. There's lots of uses for it in the game if your game master really focuses and lets you kind of be brutish and use that to get information, use that to kind of strong arm people to do what you want. It could be even to the point of, you're threatening the kitchen staff, and that's how you're allowed to, stash a knife in the turkey that gets to your table. And so you can pull that knife out in the middle of the big ball that had kept everybody's weapons out and be able to protect the king, even though you're not supposed to have your weapon. You can use it for a lot of stuff. You just have to have some creativity and interesting ways of using it. It goes along with persuasion, but persuasion's the nice way of taking care of it. Intimidation is the bad way of, well, mean way of taking care of it. I don't know, something like that. So anyway, that's intimidation. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff. Again, I'm trying to get subscriptions so I can get to that milestone, and I can do another celebration video, which live stream, which I enjoy doing them, and I always try to get some interesting guests on and do a quiz or stuff like that. So anyway, I'm Carl, Tabletop Tango. Look at the bubbles, do the stuff, and we'll talk to you later. Savage.